But hello and welcome everyone. I'm Ziyi Wang, and I lead strategic operations and AI strategy here at Right Side Up. I'm excited to have you join us for this next session of our Building with AI series. For those of you who aren't familiar with Right Side Up, we're a collective of marketers who have helped more than 1,400 companies hit their growth goals across performance marketing, lifecycle, SEO, analytics, content, and now AI implementation. Last week, Right Side Up officially introduced our AI services for marketing teams that want to move from AI experimentation to real operational impact. We deploy AI fluent senior marketer practitioners who have both marketing expertise and AI fluency to help clients identify where AI can create leverage, prioritize what is worth building, and then actually implement those systems that teams can actually use. But today's session is going to be a little bit different from where we've focused so far in this series. Instead of showcasing a single workflow, we're going to step back and take a look at the bigger picture, how top marketers are actually thinking about and using AI right now, and the meta skill behind all of that, what we're calling the skill to build skills. Most marketing teams have already experimented with AI, and you may be one of them. But more often than not, that often looks like individuals prompting in silos, where workflows and wins really stay with one person instead of becoming something that the whole team can run. So the skill that changes this is learning how to build skills, both the actual skill files that turn a one-off win into a reusable asset, but also the muscle for recognizing what's actually worth creating a skill for and systematizing. I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Jack Atlasov. He's the director of Agentic Commerce at Right Side Up, and he has built skills that have been used and bookmarked over 1,000 times. Before I turn it over to Jack, a quick couple housekeeping items. Jack, would you mind going forward in the...
Yeah.
Oop, and we just disappeared. There we go.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Quick couple housekeeping items. All attendees are muted, except the presenters, but please submit your questions throughout the session using Zoom's Q&A feature. We'll answer as many as we can during the presentation. We'll also save some time at the end for additional questions. And today's session is being recorded, and we'll send the recording and resources out to everyone after the webinar. With that, I know I've spoken a lot. Let's move on. I'll hand it over to Jack, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Z. Can everyone hear me okay? Can I get a couple thumbs up in the chat? Uh, Yay. Okay. Awesome. Well, welcome to the Skill to Build Skills webinar here that we're going to be going over how to build really great skills over the next 30-ish minutes, and then we'll save some time for questions at the end, or we can dive deeper into some of the skill building processes that we'll walk through here. So just to quickly cover what we'll be talking about today, I'm going to cover how repeatable work beats one-off prompts and where the value of AI starts to really compound for you as you start to build skills. What skills actually are. So in essence, they're building blocks of detailed prompts, sometimes with tools, and I'll show you some live examples there. We're going to do a live build of 2 skills if we have time. The first will be more of a simpler skill, which is a personal voice skill. And the second will be extending an existing skill. So looking at a skill that already exists out there in the world that you can essentially grab for yourself because it's open source and extend, customize, improve, and make specific for your needs as a marketer or as an operator. And then the last thing we'll cover is how do you validate skills and ensure that the skills that you're building are actually working the way that you want them to and are actually providing incremental value for you for your workflows over the base model and just prompting the model as you normally would without a skill. So that's what we're going to cover today. And then at the end, we'll save a good amount of time for questions, answers, more work inside of Claude Cowork if you guys want to see more examples. So the first point I'd like to kind of start us off with is that repeatable work beats one-off prompts. I think this intuitively makes sense. I think many of you probably as you're working with AI have noticed that Sometimes you have to repeat the same thing over and over again, and it can get a little tedious. The models don't tend to remember, although this is improving, but they don't tend to remember very well, cross session over time. And that's essentially an opportunity for us to compound the value that we get out of AI through creating repeatable work, essentially. And that takes the shape of skills. So AI in marketing is moving from answers to operating systems. Most teams, most of you, I'm sure, have proved that you can get some kind of an answer from AI, but the harder problem is how do you make that work repeatable, dependable, and scalable? Some everyday use cases that we see people using AI for are things like drafting, summarizing, research analysis, and QA. What we see people still kind of struggling with or not quite doing as fully as we think that it can be done is providing the models with enough context, judgment, approval structures, handoffs across session, and essentially making implicit or tacit knowledge, or sometimes it's called tribal knowledge, explicit so that the models can operate on all of this. And this is where skills can come in. So what skills add is reusable skills can carry that method of making implicit knowledge explicit. And you can take that method, you can scale it across your team, you can scale it across your workflows, and essentially get a lot more out of the models. So a pro tip here is, as you're working with AI, keep a running list, and you can actually ask AI to help you with this, whether it's Claude Cowork or ChatGPT, Codex, Claude Code, whatever your preferred tool is. You can essentially keep a running list of every task that you hand to AI more than 3 times in a month, and that can become your skill backlog. And then the more counts of the repeated tasks that you have, the higher in prioritization you can kind of push those tasks to be made into skills. That's just one methodology that we found works really well for people. So what's a skill? What is this thing that we call skills? Essentially, it's a building block that carries the method of work into and across your sessions of working with AI. Another way to put it, a skill is a saved set of instructions and resources, aka context, that an agent or AI model can load and run whenever the task or job is relevant. And actually, if we do another part to this series of building skills, we would love, we've already kind of talked about this internally, but we'd love to kind of show you how some of this like skill discovery and ability to surface opportunities for skills can also be automated with skills. So it can kind of get a little meta, but the first layer is just like identifying yourself when there's an opportunity for a skill and building those skills. And then the advanced version of that is having the AI identify when there's opportunities for skills. So if there's a lot of interest after this call, we'd love to do a part 2 where we go even deeper into some of these automations through skills. But anyway, back to this slide. So a skill is a saved set of instructions and resources an agent or AI model can load and run whenever the task or job is relevant. So you have building blocks that comprise skills. Those are units of agentic workflows, and skills can chain many building blocks together that they can then run end to end across this scaffold, essentially, of work. Typically, skills are comprised of a markdown file that is a detailed prompt with certain tools and rules, examples, context. You save this thing, this essentially just a text file. And then when you load the skill into the context of your Claude Cowork or Claude Chat or ChatGPT, it will read all of those instructions. It will find those pieces of tooling if you've included that in your skill, and it will be able to work with all of that and produce those consistent outputs that we're looking to produce over time. Some examples that we've built internally at Right Side Up that we use all the time are our brand skill, our style skill, and actually, we didn't build this last one, but Anthropic provides a skill creator skill, which I actually used today before this webinar to build a skill so that you guys can see how skill creator works to help you build skills, essentially. You can further customize all of these skills to make them your own. You can extend them, right? But initially, these are some great skills to have. Let me take a sip of water. How's everybody doing so far? Following along? Yay. Thumbs up. All right, let's go. So most teams that we found and talked to aren't really blocked by, using AI for prompting or accessing AI. They're mostly blocked by context. And this is true for skill building as well. So essentially, the difference between a really useful skill and just a prompt that gets automatically injected into your workflow is oftentimes the amount of context, tooling, and different kind of rules that you put around that prompt to ensure a high quality outcome. So a one-off prompt might be, one person, one time. The judgment of whether the result is good or bad, right, or successful or not successful, that judgment stays implicit in your head. There's not really a clear definition of what a successful outcome looks like. And when you're done with that chat or that session, you don't really get to save any of that work, essentially, unless you go and copy paste that from the old session into a new session, which is really tedious and kind of annoying. A repeatable skill is context and rules written down in a file that also includes defined output outcomes, essentially, right? So like success criteria and that success criteria and defined rules and all that context gets tested as you're building the skill on fresh, messy inputs, so you can validate that the skill is actually, contributing value to your workflow. And ideally, there's a self-improvement kind of mechanism built in here so that your skills continuously improve over time as your workflows advance and as you advance as an AI operator. So a good skill candidate is almost certainly already present in your daily workflows. And we touched on this a little earlier, but essentially you want to set up systems, whether it's just yourself kind of monitoring what you're working on a lot, or you track it in a Google Sheet, or however you want to do it. I mean, I've used AI to do this for myself for a long time now because AI is pretty good at tracking work. And you can actually, there are skills for this as well. So you can track what you're working on repeatedly, and that can go into a backlog, right? And then essentially you can filter those through based on number of times you're working on something in a given week or month. Also, like, how much judgment does it contain, this task that you're working on, essentially? Like how much implicit knowledge is there in this task that the AI probably wouldn't have because it wasn't trained on your specific workflow, right? And does the work cross over, whether it's from you to somebody else across your team, right? Or does it cross over across like sessions and time spent? And if all of those criteria are present, that's a really good indication that you probably want to be thinking about making a skill as part of this workflow or to encapsulate the entire workflow. All right, so let's take a moment here and kick off a live build, actually pre-built in the to kind of protect all our time. I pre-built this skill creation process, but we'll walk through it inside of my Claude Cowork. But before we jump over there, I'm going to share my Claude Cowork in a moment. But before we jump over there, I just want to kind of show you what went into, like, what considerations went into this example of building a personal voice skill that I use in my work, right? So we're going to build a personal voice skill from scratch. We're going to start with evidence, context, actual communication from various sources in my work life. And we're going to start with this goal that if I was to start any session in the future and load this personal voice task in, or personal voice skill in, it would produce an output that is better than what the model would produce on its own. So we're going to capture a baseline. We're going to assemble a bunch of contexts. We're going to figure out what kind of mechanics are happening within the context to turn them into essentially like metrics, rules, guardrails, judgment, all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to test and validate. So watch as we kind of go through this in a moment. Look for how there's a baseline generated, how there's a bunch of context added, how we're generating insights from that context, registering those insights as guardrails or as kind of patterns that we want our skill to follow, and then proving out the skill. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Can y'all see my Claude Cowork here? Cool. Alrighty. So I'm going to walk you through this. Do I need to zoom in a little bit? Is it small? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So the first thing that I did to kick this whole thing off is I actually just uploaded this deck that I'm walking y'all through because it's a pretty good explanation, I feel like, of what makes for a good skill, right? So we want to ground the model in some kind of an example of a best practice or a good output. The deck serves that criteria pretty well. So I just gave it the deck. And I said, read through this presentation deck that describes a bunch of best practices for creating a personal voice skill. Next, read through all of the messaging examples that I've collected in the Markdown file. So the other thing that I did before I even kicked off this process is let's see here. I think I need to, nope, that's wrong here. There we go. Can you all see this? Yeah. Sorry, I can't see it anymore. Yeah, everybody can see it, right? Okay, cool. So the other thing I did is I collected a whole bunch of context from Slack, from Gmail, from just a bunch of different communication surfaces that I use for work. I redacted this communication for like personal information and any sort of sensitive information so that it was more so kind of addressing the tone, the vibe, the style, all of that kind of stuff, and less so like specifics of interactions. And so this is the other kind of context that I'm giving to the AI to kick off this personal voice skill. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of information in here. There's over 28 pages, something like 20 to 30 examples of different messaging surfaces like LinkedIn posts, Slack posts, emails, that kind of thing. I'm trying to give it a broad overview of different styles of communicating that I do, and so that I can use this skill for a variety of personal communication, right? So we're back here now. Can you guys see my Claude cowork? Yeah, awesome. All right, so I gave it the presentation and I gave it that large Google Doc with a bunch of examples. And then I said, use this context and resources to create a best-in-class, top 1%, remarkably accurate, personalized, true to me, amazing personal voice skill for Jack Atlasov. Now, I want to call something out here because I want to make sure people understand this is me just having fun. All right. You don't need to write all this stuff. There's nothing really special about writing best in class top 1%. I was just having a bit of fun this morning. You could just write a great skill and it'll produce pretty much the exact same output or like quality output, because the real value is in the grounding with what makes for a good skill, AKA the deck that we're walking through, and the examples, the context, the real world examples from my personal voice in my work setting. The last thing I did here, as I mentioned, Anthropic has can you guys see this pop-up on my screen? There's a pop-up. Okay, cool. The last thing that I did is I went to the plugins area, right? And let's see here. We should have skill creator here. See if it comes up. Should be here. Yeah, there it is. So if you go into skills in your settings, should I show this, how the click path of how to get here again? Do people want to see this again? So you would go to settings. Here, I'll back all the way out. Click on your profile, go to settings, go to skills under customize on the left admin panel, go to browse, go to Anthropic, because this is an Anthropic skill. They kind of preceded Claude Cowork, Claude, and Claude Code with this skill, and type into the search bar skill creator here. And then mine's already downloaded and installed, but if it wasn't, you would see like a little plus sign here, plus symbol, and then you would download this and you would have this skill. There's a little bit of customization that you can do here, but pretty much it's like ready to go out of the box. So anyway, the last thing I did, again, after giving it the context of what good looks like in my own context, I said to build the skill, use Anthropic's skill creator skill and the best practices. And then essentially it started. Now, it worked for a little while, okay? And then it created a voice review for me. Because remember, from the presentation, this is super important, right? We need to validate, let's see here, that it actually improves the baseline, right? Otherwise, we're not really being intellectually honest with ourselves that our skills are actually helping us, right? So I firmly believe, I have this strong opinion that you should be validating your skills, because what's the point otherwise, right? Might as well just use the base model for everything. So what does that look like? Well, I had it build me a little scoring system, right? So here it's just making up, some information, and I get to essentially review it. I can grade it. See, it's grading it here for me and giving me like, is it passing all of the things that we talked about are important for a skill like this based on best practices, right? So I'm holding myself accountable here, and I'm holding the AI accountable to, is the skill actually performing how I want it to perform? And then the next thing I can do is give feedback here. And if I wanted to, I could go through this a couple times. It would take the feedback, it would improve the skill. And then we can look at benchmarks here that we can set ourselves based on the scoring. And when the skill hits a certain amount of improvement as we test it and run it on new tasks, then we can essentially feel confident that we have a skill that actually really is improving our workflow. Now, I recognize that this is extra, and a lot of people don't want to, necessarily like do all of this for every skill. You don't have to do this for every skill, but I do think that it's a good practice to get into this idea of like evaluating the things that you build, and essentially proving to yourself that they're actually helping you. So after we did this, fixed a couple things, and then essentially downloaded the skill. So let's package it as a skill, share it as a personal voice skill. And then it just made it into a skill file, and we could download it. And that's the end of the first example. So it really was just a quick process of context gathering here, telling it to build the skill using Skill Creator, evaluating the output and providing some feedback, and then packaging. I actually asked it here, does the team have access to the skill? And it told me, you probably want to keep this a personal skill since it's my voice, right? Which is the right choice, I think. And then I said, okay, great, let's package it as a personal voice skill. And then it built the skill. And before I clicked this button, it said save. So I saved the skill to my computer. So, and then I just confirmed that it's saved. And that's the whole process. So let's jump back into the deck here. And maybe, should we take a moment for questions here, or should we jump into build number 2?
I think we can go ahead and jump into build number 2. Oh, wait, we do have one question. Can you review how/where you pulled all your writing examples for your voice?
Yeah, sure. So can you all see Claude? Okay, so I'm gonna basically say, pull more of my writing examples using Slack, or actually, no, how did we have this? I think it's, yeah, so Slack is here. So essentially, we're just pulling it from the connectors that we have, which I'm not really sure why Slack is not showing up right now, but this is how I did it. Essentially, I wrote, pull more of my writing examples using Slack, Gmail, and they were showing up earlier. I'm not really sure why they're not showing up. It might be because I switched models. But Gmail, and then Granola was another. That's a note taker app. But essentially, you can, maybe it'll even work if I don't do the @ symbol, using Slack, Gmail, and Granola. And then I I just kicked this off granola. Granola. So yeah, it just kind of went into those connectors because they're all connected to my Claude, and it pulled out examples. And then I redacted those examples a little bit just to preserve some, you know, uh, confidential privacy of people I'm interacting with, right? Cool. Oh yeah, wow. So you don't even need to do the at, I guess. It just connects without the at symbol.
Yeah,
So
you
that's
don't need to
cool.
do it. We
Okay.
have one more question, Jack. Could you
Yeah.
please review briefly how you created the evaluation and scoring piece of that skill?
So actually, Claude did all of that itself based on the fact that I gave it a presentation, the one that we're going through, that said that that was really important. And it came up with how, the rubric should look and, what criteria should be included in that rubric. Now, if I wanted to like have more involvement in that process, I absolutely could. But for the sake of just, this webinar, I let it decide how it wanted to kind of measure all of that. But yeah, absolutely. I spend a good amount of time thinking about how to design evaluations and benchmarks for things that I'm working on. So it is worth spending some time on that for sure.
One more question, and then we'll move on to the next one. And what practical examples and applications can you use skills for in a marketing workflow?
Oh man, so many, like everything basically. Let me give you an example. So one of the most powerful skills that anybody, this is my opinion, but I think it's backed out by just the amount of downloads and like installs that you see these skills get. One of the most powerful skills that exists is what's called a grilling skill. Now we're not covering that today. Again, that might be something that we do on a part two. I think it would be really great. I think a lot of people would get a ton of value from this. But essentially, what is grilling? It's a context alignment. Okay. So like I know something and you know something and we both need to collaborate, but you don't know what I know. I don't know what you know. And we use different words that mean different things, right? And so we need to have a way of aligning on what do we mean when we say, I don't know, like flibberty gibbet, right? Like what does flibberty gibbet mean, right? In the context of our work, right? There's a skill called grilling. There's actually a family of skills: grill with docs, grilling, grill me. They facilitate this process. And this might sound like a very simple thing, right? Like, hey, what do you mean when you say that? How do you define when you're talking about a warehouse fulfillment network? What do you actually mean, right? When you're talking about incremental ROAS, like, what do you actually mean by incremental ROAS? How do you define that, right? Like, that is so important. And it helps push the model's outputs from the average to the excellent when you take the time to align on context with the model, and these grilling skills enable that process.
Cool. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, for sure. Good questions. All right. Okay. Now I'm going to try. How much more time do we have? 15 minutes? Okay. I might go through this a little bit faster, y'all, but I really do think we can do a part two on this because there's so much to talk about here. So let's get into the next live build, which is going to be extending an already existing skill. So if you go on the internet, you can find skills that exist in places like GitHub. Okay. GitHub, essentially, for those who aren't familiar, you can think of it just like Google Drive, but for code. Can everybody see this GitHub page on my screen? Yeah. All right. So this is a skill called last 30 days. It is one of these skills, to the point of the person that just asked that question. That is, it is one of these skills that is so useful because what it does is it researches across social platforms for content based on your query that is from the last 30 days. And like that sounds simple, but I mean, think about how much that applies to, right? So, an AI agent skill that researches any topics across Reddit, X, YouTube, Hacker News, Polymarket, and the web, then synthesizes a grounded summary. So, I would like to customize this skill for my own workflows, right? So, what do? I copy this URL, I go into Claude, Let's get out of this. And I'm going to create my own custom trend research skill. So let's go to the top of this. Okay, so very similar to last time. I'm going to give it what good looks like. In this case, the presentation that we're going through, the webinar deck. I'm going to say, review the attached deck to understand all of the best practices for building skills. In this session, we're going to build a custom trend research skill from an existing open source skill called Last 30 Days Skill, which you can find at this URL. And I just paste in the URL that we just looked up. Clone, that just means copy. Clone this skill, and you don't have to say clone. If you say install, copy, it'll understand. But clone the skill into the project folder that we've set up for this project. Because this is Claude Cowork, right? We have to give it a folder to work in. So I set up a folder for trend research. Clone the skill into the project folder and create a plan for some ways we can extend our version of the skill to make it even more useful and relevant for growth marketers. So as you can see here, I'm not right away building the skill like I did with the voice skill. This is a slightly more advanced skill, so I want to plan first. So then the model is going to read the deck and the repo, and then it's going to ask me some questions. This tool shows up as a kind of pop-up on your screen. It's called the Ask User Questions tool. You can call it yourself by typing in Ask User Questions tool. So if you wanted to have it question you and interview you, you just want to call this tool. But since I already answered these questions, you're not going to see it pop up here, but I'll just show you, it's asking me some questions and I'm giving it some answers. It's giving me multiple choice options, or typically it'll show an other as well, an other option where you can kind of give it your own thoughts if you don't agree with any of the options that it's given you. So it's asking me some questions about how I want the skill to perform or act, or what features and functions I want. Then it's going to go through and clone the skill. It's going to explain the skill to itself, understand the skill. It's identified that this skill actually has coding tools, like scripts that are, in this case, Python, that are running inside the skill. The skill can actually call these pieces of code that allow you to generate more deterministic, AKA more accurate, high fidelity, consistent outputs, right? Because we want a lot of accuracy here because it's a research skill. So it's looking through all of this, and then it's basically building a plan, and it's going to show me that plan here, and I can review this plan, and I can tell it to edit the plan or add to the plan or somehow, extend the plan. And I, for the sake of time, just said, use Skill Creator to build out the trend skill. I didn't, edit the plan, but oftentimes I will. Oftentimes I'll go back and forth with the AI a bunch of times until I'm happy with the plan. And then I'll use the Skill Creator to build out the trend research skill based on all the best practices from the webinar deck, just kind of reminding it about that. Then it realizes it doesn't have all the information that it needs yet, so it asks me more questions, and I have to make more decisions. Again, this is kind of like a light version, like a light version of context alignment, essentially, is what's happening here. So then it gets all the answers that it needs, and it builds all the components that it needs to build as part of this best practice skill creation process. And then it tells me, okay, we have an RSU signal skill now. The skill MD file is built, all this stuff is built, and then it exposes some issues, right? And then we kind of read through what these issues are, and we can, again, open up our evaluator, right? And we can evaluate the outputs of the skill, provide our feedback. In this case, it's claiming that 10 tests have passed. We can provide some feedback. We can look at the benchmarks. Super important, again, to go over benchmarks if you're building skills that you're going to use all the time. I really think you're going to get a lot more out of your skills if you spend a little bit of time kind of gut checking that they're actually working the way you want them to. So after we do this, we're going to provide that feedback to the model, and then we're going to package the skill as a skill file so the rest of the right side up team can use it. They can customize it, extend it as they see fit. It then finds some issues still before packaging. Then it fixes those issues, packages the skill, and essentially I save the skill and it's ready to share with the team. And then I just confirm, does the team have access to the skill? And then it says, no, here's exactly where it stands. And it's saying basically, if you want the team to have access to the skill, you have to do this, this, and this. And I just said, for the sake of time, I said, package it so it lives locally on my computer. And then it essentially just put it in my directory. So I can access it right now. My team can't. So we're not quite done yet here. But once we do what it's telling us we need to do, in this case, add it to GitHub, the rest of the team will be able to access it. So that's the process of building a slightly more complex skill where you're going through like a planning phase. You're pulling a kind of starter skill from some source, improving it, extending it, that sort of thing. All right. So I'm going to skip through these slides because we kind of covered this actually as I was showing you how the skill was created. And essentially to wrap up, right, you want to prove that the skill works as intended before you trust it, especially if it's a really high value or like client facing skill. And to sum up, y'all, the biggest kind of takeaway that I want you to have from this entire webinar is that there is a meta skill process involved in skill building, right? So the real skill is the skill to build skills. And what that looks like is capturing context, encoding judgment, making implicit judgment explicit, figuring out what tools you need to incorporate into your skills to get the job done, defining terms and aligning on context with the AI, testing and evaluating your outputs to ensure they're better than baseline, and holding yourself and your AI accountable to actually improving over baseline, and reviewing and compounding improvements over time. Skills are not typically stationary things that never change. You probably, especially with the skills that you really use a lot, you probably want to revisit them once every couple months, maybe once a quarter, and see if you can improve them a little bit based on all of the learnings and the kind of growth that you've had, both as a marketer and as an AI user over that period of time. So 3 things to take back to your team. Remember to look for repeated work opportunities that can be turned into skills. Think about briefing the LLM and giving it that context like you would for a new hire or a junior intern or just an intern. And remember to hold yourself accountable and the AI accountable to prove the skill out on fresh work. Don't just assume that a skill is going to work and create value just because you made it. You got to kind of like test it a little bit. All right. I know we're almost at time, but do we have any questions?
Yeah, Jack, we have one question. What really is the difference between a reusable skill and a detailed prompt?
What really is the difference between a reusable skill and a detailed prompt? Well, you don't have to recreate a skill from scratch every time that you run it, right? You run a skill by doing backslash and typing in the skill name. Skills can call tools. They can literally call other skills. You can chain skills together. Essentially, you can think of a skill as like a Swiss Army knife of sorts. Sometimes the Swiss Army knife might only have one, tool, or like a multi-tool, right? It might only have like 1 or 2, but you could extend it out, and they're composable. You can chain them all together, and they survive across multiple sessions and can be shared with other people.
Does this skill essentially work like a custom GBT or a specific project folder where you put specific context output requests for a similar set of tasks that you can reuse?
That's a really insightful question, actually, because in essence, skills are what GPTs kind of evolved into. One thing that you'll find as you work with AIs more and more, I think, is that almost everything can just be a file in a folder, a text file in a folder, right? I used to work a lot with custom agents. Most people that I know that are pretty into AI now just use a lot of skills. They're so lightweight. it's just some text that sometimes calls tools, sometimes doesn't. And you can point the base model or any of the sub agents that you're running through the base model, you can point them at these skills and they'll perform really well for you if you've built a good skill. So yeah, in essence, they replaced GPTs, custom GPTs, and they're also replacing like custom agents completely in some cases.
Yeah. Would you advise for or against adding personal emails, documents, essays to ensure the skill is truly trained on your voice?
No, I don't advise against adding personal documentation. I just think, like I want to be respectful personally of private information that might be sensitive. So I may at times like redact certain pieces of information, like components of context. But yeah, I mean, like if you can share something, if it's like your work account, right, and you're using your work Claude Cowork account, then I don't know what your company policy is, but ideally, you have like the ability to share a lot of context there. It's safe. It's in AWS data centers and other like highly secured facilities that all that data is stored. So I think that it's just a personal preference of mine to sometimes redact a little bit, especially if I'm going to be sharing a skill with the rest of the team. I do like to go through and just make sure that there's nothing like specifically identifying, a specific client that might be sensitive information. But yeah, I think like you want to share like tone of voice, vibe, kind of like the way you respond to things, different scenarios, different kind of examples. So it's good to provide a lot of context.
Awesome. It looks like Lucy raised her hand if she has an additional question. Nope. I'm good. Okay. We do have a poll up. We love your feedback. And I think those are all the questions we have today. If there's any additional ones, we have 1 more minute left. If you want to, squeeze it in there. If not, okay, great. Thank you guys so much for attending. Like I said, we will be sending out this recording. And please feel free to reach out to either myself or Jack. If you have any questions around AI, implementing AI, we're always happy to have a conversation. So yeah, thank you again for attending.
Thanks, y'all. See
Bye,
ya. Happy
everyone.
happy skill building. Bye.
Yes, your homework is to go and build a skill.
Yeah.